I want to say a few words about education and what it means to be educated. My father, who had a major influence on me in terms of my understanding of education, was a student of a great educator whose name was Mark Van Doren. He actually named me after him, and at Columbia University they give every year the Van Doren Excellency in Teaching Award. He was a teacher from the 1920s until the late 50s at Columbia, and he wrote an extraordinary text on liberal education and what that means. Van Doren was in a tradition in America which is known as the great books tradition, the idea of studying the foundational texts of Western civilization, and that really is the grounding for understanding where we are, how we got here. Knowing the roots will help you understand the fruit, whether it's bitter or sweet, healthy or unhealthy. You will know why the fruit you are producing is as it is if you look at the educational archaeology, if you just look back and see where you've come from. But my father said to me recently, in fact last year, he said, my education's finally over. And he's 85 years old. Now, he's somebody who spent his life reading over and over and over again the same books that he studied in the 3 years that he was with Van Doren in his class. And he actually took permission to sit in those classes after. Van Doren studied from the Bible all the way up to Sigmund Freud and some of the 20th century writers. But he literally went through the entire corpus of Western intellectual tradition. And in some ways, what Zaytuna is, for me anyway, it is about the same thing in terms of our own Islamic tradition. And we tend to forget in the West that Islamic tradition is part of Western tradition. It's something that has been denied for a long time. There are some people like George Makdisi that had the courage, the intellectual, academic courage to admit that. But it's evident in our mathematics. Although some try to say Indian numerals, these are Arabic numerals, and they will remain Arabic. It's evident in our names that we give the stars, like Al-Tayr from At-Tayr, and Ad-Dabaran from Ad-Dabaran, and Ibtal-Jawza, which we call Beetlejuice, because they couldn't pronounce Ibtal-Jawza, so it's called Beetlejuice, right? So even when we look up in the heavens, we're looking at the influence of the Islamic civilization on the West. When we look at our numbers, when we crunch numbers, we are looking at the influence of Islamic civilization on the West. This is undeniable. And so what we're doing really here is reestablishing part of the Western tradition. We are reestablishing it where it belongs, right here, because it is part of the story of the West. And to deny that part is to deny a member of your family that you're either ashamed of or you don't know anything about. You're ignorant of, like the long-lost uncle that shows up. I didn't know I had you. Right? Jane Eyre's inheritance from her uncle that she doesn't know that she has. So it's important for us to ask that question, what is education? Because in the West, we are in a crisis. And to deny that crisis is to deny what is so obvious in front of us, because all you have to do is walk outside and go down the road and look at these frat houses when the colleges, the university is opening up, and you look at the type of behavior that's going on in adults, not children. These are 18, 19, 20, 21, some of them close to their 30s, that are behaving not like infants. I don't know what adjective to use, but for me it's very tragic to see a loss of dignity, because this is central to what education is about. Education is about learning to carry yourself. What used to be called in this culture comportment, we don't even use that word in English anymore, but on my great-grandmother's report card from 1882 in a high school in Wichita in Wisconsin, the very first thing that she was graded on was comportment, which comes from a Latin word, how you carry yourself. We call that in the Islamic tradition adab. Adab. The adib is the one who is disciplined in himself and somebody who speaks with discipline. He knows how to put words in its proper place. A thing for every place and a place for everything. So, what is education? In Arabic we say tarbiyah wa ta'lim. Tarbiyah comes from the same root word that Lord comes from, Rabb. Allah is the murabbi, the one that nurtures, the one that causes to grow. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. To nurture a student, to watch them grow intellectually, spiritually, morally. Ta'lim is from a word which means to make an impression. Allama means to impress on something. A'lama is mark. The cuneiform writing was by pushing into the clay and creating an impression. And that is a mark. So he makes his mark on society. We use the same term in English. That is what ta'lim is about. It is about impressions that impact students, that have an effect, that take an effect. If we look at what the root word in Latin of educare, educate, educare, which means to lead out of. In other words, to draw out what is already in there. The idea that you cannot really teach anybody anything, you can only make them remember what they already know. And that's why the Quran is called a dhikr, because it is a reminder of what we already know. Alastu bi rabbikum bala shahidna. Am I not your Lord? We all know that. We need to be reminded of that truth. Education is about remembering, making whole. When you look at the boredom that exists in modern American education, you look at the boredom of the students, you look at the faces that they carry to school, you look at them, and I've been in classes, I've taught, I've lectured all over the United States, in universities all over the United States. You look at their faces, and you look at the boredom. One, because they're wondering, why am I studying this? What is this for? What's the purpose of this? The smart ones check out early on, like Bill Gates, who never got a degree from Harvard because he dropped out. That's what happens to the smart ones. Steve Jobs dropped out. All of these billionaires, they dropped out because they learned early on, I want to make money, and this is not the way to make money. So if you go to college to earn a livelihood, you're wasting your time. You're even now being encouraged to drop out by some of the leading CEOs in America, encouraging students to drop out, open sourcing, because most of what these students are learning in school will not apply to anything. It's not going to give them some kind of vocational training. This is the reality. There is a strong argument that college now is obsolete. And this is being put forward. Much of what students are learning, why are they studying geometry? Geometry makes absolutely no sense anymore. Lord Alfred Whitehead, one of the greatest mathematicians of the 19th and 20th century, said that the single most important form of mathematics in the modern world is statistics. And they don't even teach that in high school. And yet a junior high school student could master it. It's not a difficult subject. Statistics is determining so much of what is around us. They're using statistics constantly, and yet students are not taught statistics until they take a course in college. They might have a little bit in college, in high school, but it's not much. Why are they studying geometry? Why study algebra? They're sitting there wondering, what does this mean? Why am I doing this? Why do I care what 2x plus 3x equals? I don't care, because there is no overarching meaning to all of these things. There is no real educational philosophy behind these things. If you look historically, all of these things had meaning. And I'll just give you a quick example. We call these the liberal arts. All of us, I think, on this panel have a BA. Does anybody have a BS? All right. Yeah, I won't hold it against you. A BA is a Bachelor of Arts. If you ask anybody that has a Bachelor of Arts, what is the arts that you're a bachelor in? They will not be able to tell you. They won't even know that arts comes from a word which means tool. Tool. Army is from the same root. Arithmetic is the same root. Arithmetic is ars metrica, the tool to measure by. So the liberal arts are liberating tools. They're tools that free your mind from the inherent prejudices of the mind. Now, the liberal arts was distinguished from the servile arts, vocational training, where you go to college to learn how to do something as a vocation. And these were the servile arts because they were simply things that you learned, and then you could go out and earn a livelihood through those things. This is largely what the college and the university has become in the West. It is no longer a place to pursue truth. It's a place to pursue money. And because those making the most money are those who are most adept at cheating, cheating has become widespread in our schools and universities. This is a major problem. When I found out from my son that cheating was widespread in one of the best high schools in the state of California, I was very distraught by it, because I went to a school where our teacher purposely walked out of the classroom during the test in high school and said, "You are on your honor, boys." There was no monitoring at the high school I went to. It was a Catholic high school. No monitoring. "You are on your honor, boys." When I was mentioning this to a student at Stanford in medical school, he said, "Oh, that's no big deal. I cheated my whole way through high school." And I said to him, "Are you cheating your way through medical school now?" Because that's very disturbing to me. Because seriously, when I was in high school, I didn't think of cheating, and the people that I was in school with, I'm sure one or two people might have done that, but I was not with people that did that as a practice. Because I was taught by my mother, you don't cheat. Not because you're going to go to hell, but because honesty is the best policy. It wasn't related to religion. It was simply related to being a human being, a mensch. So the liberal arts were there to train people to use their intellect so they could pursue the truth for the rest of their lives. Muhammad ibn Hassan said, our tradition is a tradition of learning from the cradle to the grave. If you're not prepared to commit yourself from the cradle to the grave, then don't bother trying to learn our tradition. So when my father said at the age of 84 that his education was done, he was talking about a tradition within the West of the liberal arts. Mortimer Adler, who was one of my teachers and one of his teachers and a close friend of Van Doren, said that it takes at least 60 years to become educated. You don't get an education from high school. You don't get an education from university. You're not going to get an education from Zaytuna. But if Zaytuna does its job, you will get the tools to become educated. And those tools will last you. Because this is what learning is about. Now, just to give you an example of what our tradition is about. When I was 23 years old in the Sahara Desert, I was with a teacher of mine who's a Bedouin. He grew up moving. They had about 3 or 4 places that they moved to, and he had what's called a madrasa mutanaqila, a college, a mobile college. There were times when there were over 1,000 students. If you went there at 2 in the morning, from 2 till Fajr, all you would hear is the recitation of the students around fire that they had made. Literally. And I'm not making this up. When I was studying a text in Aqidah, but there was somebody ahead of me who was studying a text in advanced Aqidah. And he was studying the section on al-Jawahir al-Fard, which are the particles that make up existence, because in our tradition, Imam al-Baqallani and others, which comes out of the Mu'tazilite initially, but Imam al-Baqallani formulated an atomic theory of the world. In fact, in the history of the atom, a book written by a Cambridge professor of physics, in the history of the atom, he argues that the Islamic atomic theory is a unique theory in which they cannot find the historical precedents for it. The atomic theory that came out of Islamic civilization. The Jawahir al-Fard are not atoms that we know today that can be split. They are the particles that make up existence. They are the quanta of existence. When this young Bedouin was asking him, what does that mean? Murabt al-Hajj picked up sand and he threw it up in the air. And he said, This, if we could have the veils removed, we would see that everything that we can see, touch, and feel is like these particles of dust in the air. This is what our Islamic teaching was doing to Bedouins. So what was it doing to the scholars of Al-Qayrawiyyin, the scholars of Al-Azhar, of the Nizamiyya? If that's what it gave the Bedouin, a concept of the atomic world, what was it doing in other places? We believe that education is rooted in the sacred. If you cut it off from the sacred, you destroy education. It has no meaning. This is what our students all over this country know in their heart of hearts. They cannot articulate it, but they know it. I am studying something that does not have meaning because you have not told me why I am studying this. It can't simply be to make money, because there are much more intelligent things to study if you want to make money than algebra or geometry. So if those liberal arts of grammar, rhetoric, and logic, which were the foundation of the Islamic tradition, we are a language-based tradition, signs. And the two signs that we speak, humans speak, we have two types of signs. We have language signs and number signs. And we call these the language arts and the arts of mathematics. This was traditionally what was education in the West and in the Muslim world. These were the tools of education. In the Christian West, it was to understand ultimately God's revelation through the Bible. In the Muslim East and West, it was to understand God's revelation through the Quran. That's what we're committed to. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us tawfiq. In the end, I would just ask you all to read this book if you want to understand what has happened in this country, why our students are increasingly incapable of thinking, why they can't reason, why we have some of the worst test scores all over the world, even though I'm totally against the testing, but even by the metrics of their own system, their system is failing. So, weapons of mass instruction, a school teacher's journey through the dark world of compulsory schooling. I don't know how many of you know about the Tuskegee syphilis study, which was where physicians in this country injected syphilis into African Americans to see the effects over time. It's a well-known study. But only recently we found out not only that were they doing it in Mississippi, they were also doing it in Guatemala. In 1947, they were injecting people down in Central America with syphilis, gonorrhea, and other diseases to see the effects of these diseases on these people. These were scientists that were produced by the best colleges in the United States of America. The same colleges that produced the people that robbed all of you who own homes in this country, robbed you of your equity. The same people. These are the products of American universities. And until we deal with the fact that without teaching people meaning, without teaching people purpose, you create monsters. You create the disease known as civilization. This is what happens when you divorce education from the sacred. People talk about sacrificing, and they don't even know the root meaning of that, sacrus facere, to make sacred. When you sacrifice in your life, you are doing it for the sacred. We can't get out of these meanings because they're embedded in the very language that we speak. And that's what's lacking. And until we reestablish the true roots of learning and knowledge and why we're learning and what is the purpose of knowledge, we will see it get worse and worse and worse. Muslims have an incredible opportunity right now because we are a people that still, in spite of ourselves, because of our Prophet ﷺ, because when he said one of the signs of the end of time is that people will study for other than the sake of God. They will go to school for other than the sake of God. Because every civilization, Hindu, Buddhist, Confucianist, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim, all of them understood that learning was to make a better human being. Learning was not to make more money. It was to make a better human being. Not for learning's sake, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.